Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world you might think you know. But trust me, your cozy imagination is no match for the grim reality. Picture yourself waking in a dim, smoky hut, your eyes stinging from soot drifting lazily through the air. Straw pokes rudely into your skin, through thin rags you generously call bedding, and your stomach grumbles, a familiar protest against yesterday's sparse supper. You're a peasant in medieval France. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to hear from you. Post your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub sleep from your eyes, each movement slow and deliberate. There's no rush to greet the morning, not because you're lazy, but because every inch of your body aches from yesterday's relentless labour. The cold seeps up through the earth beneath you, chilling bones already weakened by years of harsh living. There's no hearth crackling invitingly nearby. Fuel is precious, saved only for cooking. Your toes, bare and calloused, brush against icy dirt, sending shivers creeping through your tired frame. The dawn hasn't yet pierced through gaps in the flimsy walls of your hut, but the rest of the world around you is stirring nonetheless. Livestock grunts softly in their cramped corner, a luxury you share your single-room home with. Chickens peck idly at your toes, indifferent to your discomfort, their presence more necessity than companionship. After all, warmth from their bodies is one of the few comforts you can claim. Your eyes drift upwards, catching glimpses of sky through holes in your thatched roof, holes you swear you patched just last week. Another day, another storm, and yet another leak. Historians still argue whether peasant huts were intentionally built poorly, merely to reflect the peasant's status, though honestly, when your home doubles as an animal barn, status probably isn't your biggest worry. There's a resigned sigh as you rise to your feet, joints popping in protest, already well past their prime, despite your relative youth. Personal hygiene isn't high on your morning list. No bathroom mirrors or fresh soap here. You're lucky if your hut boasts even a bucket of cold water. Baths, after all, are reserved for special occasions, usually twice a year, whether you need them or not, you joke grimly to yourself. Your fingers scratch absently through tangled hair, more out of habit than hope of improvement. Stepping outside, the crisp dawn air hits you like a slap, pulling you fully awake. A low fog rolls across fields stretching endlessly before you, each furrow familiar, each step today promising hours of back-breaking work. The air smells like damp earth mixed with manure, not exactly perfume, but at least it's familiar. You breathe deeply, letting the chill fill your lungs, a small bracing ritual against the grim day ahead. Already, neighbours shuffle out from their own cramped huts, nodding briefly, each silent greeting carrying a hint of mutual misery and understanding. No one is smiling, there's little reason for it. Instead, you exchange glances that speak volumes. Your collective exhaustion binds you closer than words ever could. You stretch your arms upwards, hoping to chase away at least some stiffness before the day's brutal demands begin. Nearby, a dog whines softly, hoping for scraps you both know don't exist. You reach down, scratching gently behind its ears, a small tender moment, almost making you forget your plight. Almost. You can't afford to linger long. The Lord expects labour, the fields won't tend themselves, and your belly certainly won't fill without work. As your stomach twists painfully once again, a bitter reminder of empty cupboards, you realise food won't be your companion anytime soon. Breakfast is a luxury reserved only for those with wealth, and that's certainly not you. Instead, you tighten your worn belt another notch, grimly joking to yourself that at least it makes you look slimmer. The distant chime of the local church bell finally pushes you forward. Your shoulders slump instinctively at the sound, knowing it signals yet another grueling day. It's no secret among peasants, that a shorter day rarely means less work, just greater urgency. You shuffle reluctantly down the path, worn boots kicking up mud that clings stubbornly, as if mocking your effort. You can't help but mutter about why mud never seems to bother the Lord's fancy boots quite as much as yours. As the sun finally peaks above the horizon, painting fields with shades of reluctant gold, your morning's harsh reality fully sinks in. You're a cog in a merciless machine, tirelessly spinning but getting nowhere. Still, as you approach your designated field, rough hands grasping a primitive hoe, there's a grudging acceptance. After all, what other choice do you have? Welcome to your filthy, exhausting, thankless life as a medieval French peasant. It's going to be a very, very long day. You shuffle forward, feet already caked in mud, the icy ground seeping through thin, battered shoes. The fields stretch ahead, an endless ocean of brown, cold and damp, your personal realm of torment for the day. The wind, harsh and biting, whistles around you, finding gaps in your scratchy wool clothing and sending chills racing down your spine. Your stomach twists again in hollow protest, reminding you that breakfast was a luxury left only to imagination. You clutch your crude hoe, a tool more suited to torture than farming. The wooden handle splinters slightly, biting into your palms as if punishing you for merely existing. It's one of the cruel ironies of your peasant life. The very tools you rely on most cause constant discomfort. Yet there's no alternative. Metal tools are expensive, reserved for those whose hands never know real labour. In the dim morning glow, others trudge silently beside you, expressions matching your own weary resignation. Conversation is rare, energy too precious to waste on small talk. Yet there's comfort in numbers, a silent companionship born of shared misery. Occasionally, someone coughs, a harsh hacking reminder of how fragile life truly is here. No one mentions it. Illness is so common. Acknowledging it feels pointless, like commenting on the endless mud beneath your feet. Finally, reaching your designated patch of earth, you stare down with a mixture of dread and resignation. Last year's harvest barely sustained your family. You doubt this year will be any kinder. Historians still argue whether medieval farming techniques deliberately kept peasants impoverished. But honestly, standing ankle-deep in freezing mud, it hardly matters to you. Survival, not conspiracy, fills your exhausted thoughts. You thrust the hoe into the soil, muscles instantly protesting. Each strike sends jolts through your already aching arms, reverberating deep into your bones. The land resists stubbornly, as if mocking your feeble attempts. With every strike, more mud splashes onto your legs and chest, clinging to you like a second skin, cold and unyielding. You briefly wonder whether anyone has ever drowned in mud, because right now it feels terrifyingly possible. Hours drag by, each movement increasingly mechanical. Your mind wanders aimlessly, a small mercy to distract from the relentless pain. You daydream briefly of warm fires and hearty stews, comforts that exist only in the distant castles you'll never enter. Your stomach growls loudly, rudely interrupting the fantasy, grounding you firmly back into reality. Thanks for the reminder, you mutter sarcastically, drawing a weary chuckle from a nearby labourer, your grim humour appreciated amid the misery. Around midday, a faint whistle rings out, signalling a brief pause, never long enough, and yet always desperately needed. You straighten slowly, joints creaking audibly, wondering briefly how you'll ever move again. Stretching feels more painful than relieving, muscles cramped into permanent rebellion. You glance upward, the sun now high, bright and mocking. It provides light but no warmth, as if nature itself conspires against you. Lunch, if you can even call it that, is an event filled more with hope than sustenance. You retrieve a scrap of stale bread from your pocket, gnawing at it miserably, trying not to notice how mould has begun colonising one corner. You hesitate only a moment before shrugging it off, Mold might just be the extra flavour you need. Besides, medieval folklore insists mold can cure diseases, a conveniently optimistic thought when desperation is your seasoning of choice. Nearby, a fellow peasant chews thoughtfully on a shriveled onion, considered something of a delicacy compared to your bread. You stare jealously, briefly contemplating whether onion theft is punishable by death. The village stocks loom ominously in your mind, quickly extinguishing temptation. You return your focus to the bread, now tasting oddly sour, forcing it down with grim determination. Your brief respite ends far too soon, the whistle signalling the return to work. You sigh, gathering your strength, knowing every afternoon hour will only intensify the ache in your bones. By now, blisters bloom painfully across your palms, the result of countless hours gripping crude tools. Bandages are rare, reserved mostly for severe injuries, and certainly never wasted on minor inconveniences like daily agony. Resuming work feels infinitely harder than starting fresh. Each hoe strike now seems heavier, every step slower, your breath ragged. The day's chill gradually settles deeper inside you, stubbornly refusing to be shaken free. You glance around, noting similar exhaustion on every face. Solidarity, though unspoken, flows between you all, a shared sense of endurance, misery, and quiet strength. The shadows slowly lengthen, a sure sign evening approaches, though darkness won't end your labour, only shift its location. Your stomach aches persistently, this time accompanied by sharp hunger pangs, impossible to ignore. You push through the final hours, with sheer, stubborn willpower alone, knowing rest remains far away. Every muscle screams silently, protesting vehemently with each new motion. Finally, the setting sun offers at least symbolic relief, bathing fields in fiery orange and soft purple, almost peaceful enough to make you forget your misery. Almost. You turn slowly, surveying the land you've laboured over all day, bitterly aware that tomorrow brings more of the same. You briefly question your life's meaning, but existential philosophy is another luxury peasants can't afford. The return trek home is slow, marked by painful steps and whispered groans. Your companions shuffle silently beside you, united in shared exhaustion. You catch sight of your tiny hut in the fading light, oddly welcoming despite its dilapidated state. Its mere presence promises shelter, though little else. You wonder if tonight's sleep will bring any genuine rest, knowing full well tomorrow's dawn arrives cruelly early. As you finally collapse onto your rough straw bedding, a sarcastic thought drifts into your tired mind. At least today wasn't worse than yesterday. Small mercies, right? Your weary smile fades quickly, replaced by exhausted resignation. After all, medieval peasant optimism usually ends where the next day begins. And trust me, tomorrow's going to be just as miserable. Morning greets you yet again, far earlier and colder than feels humane. Your sore muscles protest vehemently, stiffening into rebellious knots as you slowly rise. Yesterday's toil has taken a heavy toll, and every fibre of your body urges you to lie back down, sink deeper into that crude, prickly bedding, and simply ignore your relentless responsibilities. But medieval life offers no sick days, no leisurely breaks. You groan, shuffle to your feet, and prepare once more for the relentless routine that defines your existence. Today, your weary gaze moves beyond your usual patch of mud to a distant field, ominously waiting your attention. This new field is worse, untouched since last harvest, and now thick with tangled weeds and stubborn thistles. Nature here seems deliberately spiteful, determined to resist your feeble attempts at cultivation. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly believed malicious spirits lurked beneath stubborn soil patches, but staring at the thorny mass before you, superstition suddenly seems reasonable. Grabbing your battered scythe, another tool more adept at torture than farming, you head toward the unyielding plot. Your clothing, a a patchwork of wool scraps stitched awkwardly together, itches incessantly against your skin. It hasn't been washed in months, maybe even years, and now carries a unique scent. Equal parts sweat, dirt, and quiet desperation. You scratch absent-mindedly at your neck, only managing to irritate the skin further. As you step into the tangled mass of weeds, you swiftly realize your task isn't merely backbreaking, it's soul-crushingly tedious. You swing your scythe with all the precision of someone who learned farming through trial, error, and injury. Lots of injury. Each swing lands awkwardly, often missing its intended target entirely, drawing snickers from your companions. Their amusement fades quickly as they join you, soon sharing your frustration as the stubborn plants refuse to yield. Your hands, already raw from yesterday's labour, quickly blister again. Painful welts burst open, mingling blood and dirt together, a disgusting yet oddly poetic symbol of your daily plight. Yet you press forward, each swing an act of stubborn defiance against nature's resistance, your Lord's expectations, and the unending ache in your bones. Maybe I'll get lucky, you mutter sarcastically, and finally strike gold beneath this cursed soil. A few chuckles ripple softly through the exhausted group. Humour is sparse but essential, a flimsy shield against your harsh reality. Midday approaches, sun climbing higher, offering little warmth but plenty of irritation. Sweat trickles down your forehead, stinging your eyes, though the air remains perversely cold. Your stomach twists sharply, loudly protesting its emptiness again. You fantasize briefly about meals you'll never taste, roast meats, rich sauces, buttery loaves, fantasies as distant and unattainable as a king's throne. Today's actual lunch is even worse than yesterday's mouldy bread. Watery gruel, pale and tasteless, seasoned mostly by dirt from your filthy fingers. Beside you, another peasant grumbles that even pigs eat better, and he isn't wrong. Aristocratic hogs dine on apples, nuts, and fresh vegetables, feasts compared to your sludgy bowl of disappointment. You swallow reluctantly, vaguely wondering if swallowing air might be more nutritious. The spoon you use, crude and wooden, is splintered, catching on your lips painfully with each bite. At least pain distracts briefly from taste, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Your brief respite ends quickly, a harsh shout ordering your return to work. You sigh, reluctantly leaving behind your half-eaten gruel, though calling it half-eaten implies desire. Something sorely lacking here. The afternoon drags on, sun slowly dipping lower, turning sky and fields, various shades of pale orange and gloomy purple. You continue to hack stubbornly at the field, your scythe seemingly growing heavier with each swing. Muscles tremble beneath your filthy clothing, exhaustion seeping deeper into bones you're convinced might actually shatter if strained further. Nearby, one unfortunate labourer slips, falling face first into a muddy patch. There's momentary silence before quiet laughter erupts. Even you smile briefly, though your laughter dies quickly as you realise the mud now covers yet another precious set of clothing. Precious only because replacements are non-existent. Washing is barely an option when the nearest clean water source is miles away. Medieval peasants, after all, rarely waste time on cleanliness when mere survival hangs by a thread. Eventually, evening arrives, an unwelcome companion ushering more chill and fatigue. Your scythe, now chipped, bent, and nearly useless, rests finally at your side. You gaze at your day's pathetic progress. The weed-strewn field, stubbornly defiant, barely tamed. Tomorrow promises more of the same. Another day wasted fighting nature's relentless resistance. As you trudge home, footsteps painfully heavy, you overhear a conversation. A fellow peasant suggesting maybe planting crops upside down would trick the earth into growing more easily. Another insists burying rooster feathers beneath seedlings guarantees success. Such superstitions sound utterly absurd, until desperation turns them strangely appealing. At this point, why not try planting seeds backwards, upside down, sideways, or under a full moon. You silently decide tomorrow you'll bury an onion beneath the stubborn patch, because why not embrace medieval folklore at its ridiculous best? Finally reaching your hut, you collapse onto your familiar, uncomfortable bed of straw. Tonight your bones ache deeper than ever before, limbs throbbing rhythmically, protesting the relentless abuse. Your stomach twists again, mocking your feeble attempts to ignore hunger pangs that now feel permanently etched into your being. Your weary eyes drift slowly shut, mind still swirling with thoughts of stubborn weeds, foolish superstitions, and persistent starvation. The grim humour that sustained you earlier fades, leaving only stark reality behind. Tomorrow promises more exhaustion, more frustration, more misery. And still, somehow, you'll rise again, because tragically, medieval peasants possess boundless reserves of stubborn, relentless resilience. But honestly, couldn't that resilience have come with slightly fewer blisters? You wake abruptly, pulse quickening as harsh knocking rattles your fragile hut's door. Your heart sinks. This particular knocking never means anything good. Reluctantly you rise, joints cracking audibly in protest, and shuffle to open the door, revealing your least favourite visitor, the Lord's tax collector. He stands there, smug and impatient, holding a scroll that promises nothing but more hardship. His presence instantly drains your already minimal energy. You've barely scraped by, your crops haven't exactly flourished, and yet here he is, demanding more of what you don't have. You already handed over nearly everything from your last harvest, but taxes in medieval France are like bad neighbours. They always return uninvited and empty your cupboards while you're not looking. The collector eyes your humble dwelling with open disdain, as if you chose poverty as a lifestyle. You briefly imagine asking him if he's here to rob you politely, or simply seize your possessions outright, then wisely bite your tongue. Sarcasm, unfortunately, tends to lead directly to the stocks. He clears his throat dramatically, unfurling the scroll with a flourish that seems unnecessarily theatrical. Your stomach twists with dread as he lists off the various obligations: land taxes, hearth taxes, head taxes, and taxes whose names you swear he's inventing on the spot. Your head spins from the sheer number of demands. Historians still argue whether these endless taxes were intentionally designed to keep peasants impoverished. But right now, conspiracy theories matter less than survival. As he continues reciting your debts, your eyes wander anxiously toward your meagre possessions. Perhaps he'll seize the cracked wooden bowl or the rusted cooking pot you've kept patched up for years. It's absurdly ironic that your possessions hold such little value, yet the Lord's representative always seems eager to claim them anyway. Your neighbour once joked bitterly that even your fleas could be taxed, and honestly, at this point, you wouldn't doubt it. The collector finally finishes his seemingly endless list, waiting expectantly for your response. You sigh deeply, reaching into a small chest hidden in the corner, pulling out a few thin copper coins. All you've managed to save after weeks of sacrifice. You place them reluctantly into his palm, noting how quickly he pockets them with practiced indifference, barely masking his disappointment at the pitiful sum. As he departs, you close your door slowly, leaning heavily against it, feeling as though you've just weathered a storm, only far more exhausting and demoralizing. You stare gloomily at your now even emptier home, wondering briefly if perhaps the rats might offer you some charity tonight. At least rodents don't demand tribute, yet. But the day doesn't grant you peace for long. Soon you find yourself trudging toward your neighbour's land, forced into a day of communal labour. Medieval society demands peasants maintain local roads, ditches and bridges, unpaid of course, as if your usual workload wasn't already crushing enough. You bitterly joke to yourself that perhaps tomorrow they'll have you paving a new road, straight to the Lord's personal wine cellar. Arriving at the site, you join your equally exhausted neighbours, exchanging solemn nods of solidarity. Today, your task involves repairing a muddy ditch, crucial for drainage, but entirely unappealing. You grasp a wooden shovel that feels heavier than it should, wincing as splinters jab your blistered palms. Your back protests immediately as you begin digging through stubborn, frozen earth, each movement more painful than the last. Hours drag slowly onward. Conversation among workers is minimal. Talking wastes precious energy. But occasionally someone mutters a darkly humorous comment about taxation, suggesting perhaps the Lord might soon charge a fee for the privilege of working his ditches. The bitter laughter ripples softly, a brief shared rebellion against misery. Your stomach growls insistently, reminding you that breakfast wasn't even an option today. Lunch seems equally unlikely. Taxes always eat first. You shovel angrily, taking your frustrations out on innocent dirt, dreaming briefly of a day when perhaps food might be more reliable than hardship. As the afternoon wears on, clouds gather ominously overhead, heavy and grey, mirroring your mood perfectly. Rain begins falling in sharp, cold droplets, stinging your face and soaking your already thin clothing. You shiver violently, shoulders hunched, but stopping isn't an option. Medieval authorities rarely accept "I am cold" as a valid excuse for halting work, though you're tempted to test this theory. Nearby, an older peasant groans softly, collapsing briefly against a muddy embankment, breathing raggedly. You pause, offering a hand, noticing how frail and exhausted he appears. "Careful, friend," you whisper, half-jokingly. "Dying here would probably count as tax evasion." He chuckles weakly, gratitude briefly lighting weary eyes. Small kindnesses are often your only comfort in this harsh world. When evening finally arrives, dark and miserable, the work ends abruptly. Not because you've finished, but simply because visibility fades completely. You stagger homeward, drenched and trembling, mud clinging stubbornly to every inch of your body. Your hut, cold and uninviting, now feels oddly welcoming. At least here, misery is familiar. Inside, you slump onto your rough straw bedding, too exhausted to remove even your muddy shoes. Your mind drifts bitterly toward tomorrow. Another day, another set of relentless demands. You wonder briefly if you might convince the Lord you've already died, purely to escape taxation. It's a ridiculous thought, but desperation breeds creative fantasies. Tonight's sleep comes quickly, more from sheer exhaustion than comfort. Dreams are troubled, filled with shadowy figures, demanding impossible tributes. Your weary mind struggles to distinguish nightmare from reality, both feeling disturbingly similar. As your exhausted consciousness slowly fades into darkness, a bitterly sarcastic thought flickers briefly through your mind. Perhaps someday the Lord might tax your very dreams too. At this point, nothing would surprise you. You're startled awake, heart racing, as a bell tolls insistently in the distance. It's Sunday. Another morning meant for rest, or so you'd think. But as a medieval peasant, Sundays mean yet another form of labour. Church attendance. This isn't optional. The church holds your soul hostage, demanding regular appearances as fervently as your Lord demands taxes. You rub sleep from your eyes, grimly joking to yourself that maybe the church and Lord secretly compete for who can drain you most. You rise, wincing at your still aching muscles, pulling on your least filthy clothing, though calling it Sunday best is laughably optimistic. Your garments itch relentlessly, wool fibres irritating your skin, and you vaguely recall your grandmother's belief that itchiness is simply penance for your sins. Considering your daily life, you wonder exactly how sinful peasants could possibly be, aside from occasionally daydreaming about stealing bread. Outside, your neighbours gather, faces grim yet resigned, beginning the slow trudge toward the church. The path there isn't short. Churches were deliberately built at distances that seem designed to maximise discomfort, historians argue. After all, suffering brings you closer to God, or at least that's the official line. You mutter darkly that maybe God might consider moving slightly closer next time. The morning is chilly, dampness seeping through your battered shoes. You shiver, arms crossed tightly, shoulders hunched protectively against the relentless cold. The slow procession moves silently, no one eager for what's ahead. A long, uncomfortable sermon filled with dire warnings, repeated insistently by a priest who likely hasn't skipped breakfast in his entire life. The church looms ahead, starkly impressive despite, or perhaps because of, its plainness. Its stone walls are solid, cold and indifferent. You wonder briefly whether its architects deliberately designed it to intimidate, reminding you constantly of your humble, miserable place in the universe. As you step inside, a wave of chill air envelops you. Medieval churches are notoriously drafty, and this one seems to have perfected the art. Inside, wooden benches await, impossibly uncomfortable, forcing your already sore body into awkward positions. You settle gingerly, aware the next few hours will test your patience and endurance equally. The priest enters solemnly, beginning his sermon in Latin, a language neither you nor anyone else around you truly understands. You wonder briefly if he's secretly reciting recipes, confident none of you peasants would ever notice. Your mind drifts as the unintelligible drone continues, though you're careful to maintain the appearance of attentive reverence. Falling asleep risks humiliation, or worse punishment. Medieval priests had little patience for sleepy peasants. The priest's voice rises dramatically, startling you back into alertness. He begins describing fiery torments awaiting sinners, and you shudder, wondering briefly if medieval clergy secretly enjoyed terrifying their audiences. Eventually, the sermon transitions into something you can actually understand. Harsh instructions in your local tongue, mostly reminders about tithes owed to the church. The priest reminds you that 1/10 of your pitiful harvest belongs to God, though conveniently collected by the church. You sigh inwardly, wondering if perhaps the church might occasionally loan God's share back when your cupboards sit empty. Probably not. As the service drags endlessly onward, your stomach growls loudly, rudely interrupting a silent prayer. You flush in embarrassment, hoping no one notices, but nearby peasants simply nod sympathetically, their own stomachs echoing your misery. Sundays might claim your spiritual focus, but hunger cares nothing for rituals. Eventually, mercifully, the priest finishes. You rise stiffly, grateful to escape the wooden bench's torture, but not free yet. Outside awaits another obligation, labouring in the churchyard. Sundays aren't just for sermons, they're also for maintaining church property, unpaid and mandatory. You briefly joke that maybe next, the church will demand you mow heaven's lawns. Outside, you're handed rusty shears, instructed to trim grass around gravestones, a task combining physical discomfort with morbid contemplation. The grass is stubbornly resistant, blades dull, your progress painfully slow. Beside you, fellow peasants mutter dark humour, wondering aloud whether the dead beneath appreciate your efforts, or if they're laughing at you, relieved their own suffering finally ended. As you struggle onward, cold air stinging your skin, you overhear debates about religious relics, absurdly strange yet oddly fascinating. One peasant insists your local church contains a genuine saint's finger bone, miraculously curing diseases, though you're certain the priest's gout suggests otherwise. Another argues vehemently the finger is fake, probably a leftover chicken bone, cleverly marketed. Historians still argue whether medieval relics were mostly deliberate fakes or earnest misunderstandings, but today you're inclined to favour chicken bones. When the sun finally dips lower, signalling evening's arrival, you're allowed to leave. You stumble homeward, muscles aching anew, exhausted from a day meant for rest. Your stomach protests loudly again, knowing supper likely won't ease its complaints. Arriving at your hut, you collapse heavily onto familiar straw bedding, relieved at least to finally rest your battered body. Lying there, staring upward through cracks in your thatched roof, you reflect bitterly on Sundays. Days supposedly dedicated to your spiritual well-being, but feeling more like another means of control. You joke sarcastically that perhaps your soul might be slightly more cooperative if your belly weren't empty, But medieval authorities rarely connect hunger to spiritual failure. You're tired. Mind drifts slowly towards sleep, pondering tomorrow's inevitable labour. You silently pray, perhaps ironically, for a brief respite from misery, knowing realistically your prayers usually vanish into the church's chilly rafters. But tonight at least, sleep claims you quickly, mercifully silencing your growling stomach and sore limbs. Tomorrow promises more toil, more obligations, more relentless misery. But for now, the church can't demand any further tribute from your exhausted body. After all, medieval peasants may belong to God, but surely even God takes Sundays off occasionally, right? You jolt awake in darkness, chest tight, breathing shallow. A harsh cough rattles painfully through your chest, a grim reminder that your body isn't invincible, despite how relentlessly medieval life tries to break you. Illness is a frequent, unwelcome visitor, and it seems your latest round of misery has arrived. You lie quietly, debating whether moving is worth the effort. Your head pounds insistently, your throat feels raw, and chills ripple through you despite your thin wool blanket. You briefly imagine a future where staying in bed might actually lead to recovery, but that's not the medieval way. Rest isn't an option when daily survival demands constant effort. You push yourself up slowly, shivering violently, whispering sarcastically to yourself that at least illness makes your regular aches seem trivial. Outside, a faint dawn breaks reluctantly through heavy clouds. You shuffle slowly toward your hut's corner, where crude remedies wait in dusty jars. Medieval medicine, if you can even call it that, is a confusing mix of herbal cures, superstition, and downright disturbing ingredients. Historians still argue whether these bizarre treatments were genuine attempts at healing or elaborate placebos. Either way, they're your only hope today. You eye the assortment suspiciously, finally selecting a small clay jar filled with something vaguely green. You grimace. It's an herbal poultice your grandmother insisted cured nearly everything. You remember her stories vividly. "Apply generously, child," she'd say, "and if it burns, it's working." Comforting advice, certainly. You smear the foul-smelling paste onto your chest, instantly regretting your decision as it begins stinging fiercely. Your grandmother clearly never exaggerated. It's definitely burning, so it must be working, right? You wince, muttering sarcastically that the cure might be worse than the illness. Yet desperate peasants can't afford to be picky. Next, you reach hesitantly for another small jar, this one labelled with a scratched symbol you vaguely remember as pigeon dung. Medieval folk believed pigeon droppings had miraculous healing properties, though you're sceptical. Still, desperation overrides disgust. You hesitantly smear the unpleasant mixture onto your temples, fighting back nausea. The scent alone might be lethal to germs, or at least drive them away in horror. The treatments administered, you shuffle outside, joints protesting loudly, head still throbbing painfully. Fresh air might help, or perhaps you simply prefer illness outdoors, away from your hut's stifling smell of desperation and pigeon dung. You inhale deeply, chest aching sharply as you cough again. Nearby, neighbours emerge from their huts, some also coughing, a reminder illness here rarely strikes alone. Someone nearby mutters about bad air, medieval medicine's favourite scapegoat for illness. You silently wonder how air itself could turn malicious overnight. But logic isn't exactly medieval medicine's strong point. Another villager, clearly worse off than you, loudly blames the stars aligning incorrectly, cursing the moon specifically. You roll your eyes discreetly, doubting whether the moon truly cares about your coughing fits, though you can't deny how tempting superstition becomes when faced with inexplicable misery. Your daily work awaits, cruelly indifferent to your sickness. Today's tasks involve repairing a stone wall near the village, a demanding physical chore made infinitely harder by your weakened state. You trudge slowly toward the site, dizzy and feverish, silently cursing your body's poor timing. Each step feels heavier than usual, exhaustion seeping deeply into your bones. Arriving, you struggle to lift heavy stones, your arms trembling dangerously. Beside you, neighbours cough intermittently, sharing both illness and resentment. Someone jokes grimly that perhaps medieval germs prefer peasants. After all, nobles seem annoyingly healthy. You smile weakly, acknowledging the dark humour, though laughter only worsens your coughing fit. Lunch offers no relief. The watery broth served seems more punishment than nourishment, though it's labelled medicinal, meaning someone probably boiled random plants, hoping they'd miraculously cure disease. You choke down spoonfuls reluctantly, pretending each mouthful might restore your strength. Nearby, someone whispers confidently that crushed beetle shells cure fever, but thankfully, your lunch today remains insect-free, at least visibly. By afternoon, your fever spikes higher, chills alternating with burning heat. You briefly wonder whether medieval diseases deliberately torment peasants, though realistically, germs don't discriminate. Your vision blurs slightly, dizziness overwhelming you briefly. Another villager notices, offering advice apparently placing onions around your hut wards off illness. Though you're skeptical, onions seeming unlikely to intimidate diseases. Eventually, evening descends, shadows offering minimal relief from daylight's relentless expectations. You stagger homeward, barely aware of your surroundings, legs heavy, head spinning. Arriving at your hut, you collapse immediately onto bedding, fever now consuming your thoughts. Sleep is restless, punctuated by fevered dreams, visions of dancing onions, mocking pigeons, and moonlit skies maliciously plotting illness. Your weary mind drifts toward darker thoughts. Medieval peasants rarely recover quickly from sickness. Often they don't recover at all. But tonight, despite everything, stubborn resilience keeps you fighting. You joke weakly that perhaps tomorrow you'll be magically cured. After all, stranger things happen daily in medieval medicine. As you drift deeper toward unconsciousness, your thoughts wander cynically toward medieval doctors, or rather, the absence thereof. Physicians are rare luxuries peasants never encounter, reserved solely for those wealthy enough to actually afford a survival. You're stuck relying on superstition, questionable herbs, and pigeon droppings, medieval medicine's cruelest joke. Yet tonight, despite fevered suffering, you cling stubbornly to life. Your grandmother's advice echoes faintly. If it burns, it's working. Perhaps burning sensations truly signify healing, or perhaps you've simply grown desperate enough to believe medieval nonsense. Either way, sleep eventually claims you, mercifully dulling your pain. Tomorrow promises no relief. Illnesses rarely vanish overnight. But for now, at least, dreams offer temporary escape, even if they feature pigeons laughing at your desperation. And who knows, maybe pigeon dung really does cure everything. Medieval peasants must cling desperately to such hopes, no matter how absurd they sound. You're jolted awake, not by illness today, but by a persistent drip of icy water hitting your forehead. It takes you a moment to realise what's happening. Your hut's roof has sprung yet another leak. You sigh deeply, resisting the urge to simply roll over and accept drowning as your fate. Slowly, you rise, shivering in the morning chill, and glance upward at the gaping hole through which your misery now drips. You mutter sarcastically that perhaps medieval roofs secretly plot your demise. Your hut, barely more than sticks and straw, seems determined to fall apart piece by piece. Each storm reveals new weaknesses, holes, leaks, gaps large enough for rats to stroll through casually. Comfort here isn't merely difficult, it's practically non-existent. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants deliberately built fragile homes, knowing their lords could seize them at any time. But right now, you simply wish your hut would stay intact long enough to survive one winter. Dragging yourself to your feet, you glance around at your possessions, pitifully few as they are. A single cracked bowl, a battered wooden spoon, some rough straw bedding, all damp and miserable. Your livestock, mostly chickens, huddle miserably in their corner, clearly annoyed by the dripping. You joke softly that even chickens deserve better accommodations, though you're not entirely sure how much better. Outside, rain falls relentlessly, creating muddy puddles that threaten to become lakes. Yet, staying inside your collapsing hut isn't an option. Repairs can't wait, especially when you're risking hypothermia overnight. Grumbling to yourself, you gather crude tools, more suited to torment than construction, and step into the storm. The cold rain stings your face, instantly soaking through your already thin clothing. You mutter bitterly that medieval weather seems personally offended by your existence. You begin collecting straw and sticks scattered across your muddy yard, an endless, tedious task. Your numb fingers fumble clumsily, dropping as many twigs as you manage to collect. You joke sarcastically to yourself that perhaps you're better suited to dismantling huts than fixing them. Nearby neighbours struggle similarly, their own huts equally determined to disintegrate into piles of sticks and hopelessness. One neighbour, attempting humour, shouts over the rain, "Maybe the Lord will tax our leeks next." Bitter laughter ripples softly through the gathering crowd. Dark humour remains your only shield against despair, though you briefly wonder if medieval lords might seriously consider such absurdity. Hours drag onward, rain soaking you thoroughly, chills settling deeply into your bones. Your hut's roof stubbornly refuses improvement. Repairs temporary, at best. The wind gusts suddenly, scattering carefully collected straw into the mud again. You sigh, resisting the urge to throw your crude hammer into the storm, though frustration tempts you dangerously. Close. Lunch isn't even worth attempting today. Food supplies dwindled weeks ago, replaced by persistent hunger pangs. Instead, you press forward, determined to patch your home enough for minimal survival. Another peasant offers a whispered suggestion. Perhaps sprinkling garlic around the hut wards off bad luck. Medieval folklore loves garlic, though you doubt garlic truly scares away collapsing roofs. Still, desperate times call for desperate seasoning. As afternoon wears on, your roof slowly gains stability, or at least temporarily stops dripping directly onto your bed. You step back, soaked, muddy, exhausted, yet grimly satisfied. Your hut now looks slightly less miserable, though medieval standards of comfort remain dangerously low. You joke sarcastically to yourself that tonight you'll sleep like royalty, if royalty enjoys sleeping under damp, patchy straw. Nearby, a fellow peasant loudly curses as his own repairs collapse dramatically into mud and chaos. Sympathy fills your gaze. You understand his frustration intimately. Medieval life constantly reminds you how fragile your shelter truly is, how easily storms, winds, or simply gravity threaten your survival. Comfort remains forever elusive, replaced instead by endless patching, repairing, and hoping. Finally, evening arrives, storm gradually subsiding. You stagger toward your hut, soaked, shivering, yet cautiously optimistic. Inside, despite dampness lingering stubbornly, your bedding remains mostly dry, a small, pitiful victory. Your chickens eye you suspiciously, clearly unconvinced by your success. Though chickens rarely appreciate medieval architecture, you collapse onto straw bedding, exhaustion quickly overwhelming you. Tonight, at least, you're not actively leaking, though comfort remains fleeting. You stare upward through patched gaps, catching glimpses of night sky, stars faintly visible. Medieval peasants often saw stars clearly, not through intentional stargazing, but through gaps in their collapsing roofs. Sleep claims you swiftly, body desperately seeking relief from cold, hunger, and frustration. Your dreams tonight are oddly vivid. Visions of sturdy roofs, warm fires, and food-filled tables. Medieval fantasy often centers around basic comforts, most never experienced in reality. Comforts so simple, yet forever unattainable. As your exhausted mind drifts deeper toward unconsciousness, you reflect sarcastically that perhaps tomorrow your hut might simply collapse completely. At least then you'd be free of endless patching, repairing and worrying. Of course, freedom probably means homelessness, so perhaps you'll cling stubbornly to your flimsy roof after all. Because in medieval life, even leaking shelters beat sleeping outdoors, though just barely. And who knows, perhaps garlic really does chase away bad luck. At this point, you'll happily sprinkle garlic everywhere if it means your hut survives one more storm. But tonight, beneath patchy straw and dripping skies, you settle deeper into uneasy sleep. Your roof, at least briefly, stable. Tomorrow promises more repairs, more frustration, more collapsing. But for now, you're simply grateful your hut hasn't completely disintegrated yet. Small victories matter immensely when your entire life feels precariously balanced between survival and collapse. So tonight, beneath medieval skies and garlic-seasoned dreams, you cling stubbornly to fragile hope. Because sometimes, hope remains all peasants have left. Even if it drips incessantly from collapsing roofs, you wake up to the sharp, hollow rumble of your stomach, a cruel daily reminder that in your medieval existence, food is never guaranteed. You push yourself slowly upright, joints aching fiercely, hunger gnawing stubbornly at your insides. Breakfast, if you dare call it that, rarely happens. Instead you rise empty, facing yet another long day on a nearly empty tank. You joke bitterly that medieval peasants invented intermittent fasting, just not intentionally. Your morning ritual involves checking your sparse pantry, though calling it a pantry is laughably generous. Inside, you find exactly what you expect, nothing but disappointment. Your diet, if we can generously label it that, consists mostly of thin gruel, watery soup, and bread hard enough to serve as building material. Meat and vegetables remain dreams, luxuries that occasionally taunt you from afar, but rarely land anywhere near your bowl. Today's breakfast, disappointingly familiar, is the same thin gruel from yesterday, reheated and now suspiciously grey. You eye it warily, wondering briefly if eating air might provide equal nourishment. But hunger offers no real alternatives, so you reluctantly swallow spoonfuls, grimacing at the taste, or rather, the complete lack thereof. Medieval spices rarely grace your meals. Flavour, after all, is reserved exclusively for the wealthy. Outside, morning sunlight filters weakly through lingering clouds, casting dull, dreary shadows across muddy fields. You trudge slowly toward the day's chores, stomach growling persistently, already anticipating the meagre lunch awaiting you later. Nearby, neighbours shuffle along similarly, faces pale, weary, and permanently resigned. Hunger isn't an occasional inconvenience here. It's a permanent companion, always lurking, always gnawing gently at your resolve. Today's work involves harvesting what little barley managed to grow, despite harsh weather and endless setbacks. As you grasp rough stalks, hands already raw from previous labour, you briefly fantasize about barley cakes, fresh loaves, or hearty stews, meals medieval peasants rarely taste. Instead, this barley, like everything else you harvest, will mostly vanish into your lord's storehouses, leaving you barely enough scraps to survive. You swing your sickle methodically, stalks falling slowly, rhythmically. Occasionally you pause, glancing toward the distant manor, wondering sarcastically whether your lord ever experiences genuine hunger, or if his biggest daily struggle involves choosing between pork or venison for dinner. Your stomach growls rudely again, reminding you that such luxury questions rarely concern medieval peasants. Lunch eventually arrives, though calling it lunch feels overly generous. You gather silently with neighbours, each holding bowls filled with the same watery soup, thin enough to count individual barley grains, floating miserably. Conversation remains minimal. Hunger rarely inspires lively banter, but occasionally someone jokes darkly about the meal's quality, suggesting perhaps boiling boots would offer better nourishment. You chuckle weakly, considering how accurately medieval meals resemble boiled footwear. Nearby, Another peasant quietly insists eating worms boosts strength, a medieval belief you've heard before. You briefly eye the ground beneath you, tempted momentarily, but decide hunger hasn't yet driven you entirely mad. Still, desperation often makes even worms sound appealing, especially compared to watery disappointment currently filling your bowl. As afternoon resumes, your energy wanes dramatically, muscles protesting louder with every movement. Hunger pangs intensify, becoming sharp, painful reminders of how severely medieval diets fail peasants. You stumble occasionally, vision blurring briefly. Symptoms medieval peasants know intimately. Signs of chronic malnutrition you've grown disturbingly accustomed to. Eventually, evening approaches, shadows lengthening slowly, fields nearly harvested. You glance down at your day's work, barely enough barley harvested to sustain your family through winter, let alone satisfy greedy, lordly demands. You joke bitterly to yourself that perhaps tomorrow medieval crops might miraculously triple, but medieval miracles rarely favour peasants. Your journey homeward feels endless, stomach painfully empty, limbs heavy. Arriving at your hut, you collapse wearily onto straw bedding, aware tonight's supper promises minimal relief. Indeed, tonight's meal closely resembles breakfast. Gruel again, now cold and congealed, even less appetizing than this morning. You choke down mouthfuls grimly, silently vowing tomorrow you'll somehow find edible alternatives. Though realistically, medieval food options rarely expand beyond gruel variations. You reflect sarcastically that perhaps your lord deliberately starves peasants, hoping weak, hungry villagers won't have energy for rebellion. Historians still debate medieval dietary oppression, but right now, conspiracy matters less than hunger's relentless presence. Your empty stomach cares nothing for scholarly debates. It simply craves sustenance, nourishment forever withheld from you. Sleep eventually claims you, exhaustion temporarily silencing hunger pangs. Your dreams tonight overflow with vivid imagery, tables laden with food you'll never taste, meals rich, flavourful, delicious. Medieval peasants rarely experience culinary luxury, yet nightly dreams often torment you with visions of impossible feasts. Your weary mind jokes bitterly that perhaps starvation might be easier without nightly reminders of everything you'll never eat. As your exhausted consciousness drifts deeper, you consider briefly how medieval life constantly reduces basic human needs, food, shelter, warmth, to unattainable luxuries. Comfort remains forever distant, replaced instead by constant hunger, chronic fatigue, persistent misery. Yet somehow, medieval peasants stubbornly endure. Driven perhaps by desperate hope, tomorrow might somehow improve. Tonight, though, hope feels elusive, replaced instead by hollow resignation. Tomorrow promises more thin gruel, more watery soup, more hunger-induced headaches. But tonight, at least, sleep offers temporary relief, dreams filling empty stomachs briefly, vividly. And who knows, maybe someday, medieval miracles will finally favour peasants, granting at least one decent meal. Until then, you'll keep dreaming, hoping, swallowing watery gruel, and sarcastically joking about medieval cuisine's stunning variety. Gruel thin, gruel thick, gruel cold, gruel reheated. After all, medieval peasants must find humour somewhere, even in empty bowls and perpetual hunger. You wake up to a clatter outside your hut. 2 chickens are squabbling over a scrap of barley husk, and your first thought, oddly, is envy. At least they have food this morning. But there's no time to linger on that. Today's schedule is grimly predictable, though slightly different from the usual drudgery. Today, you're getting married. Now, before you get excited, understand this. In medieval France, marriage is less a romantic adventure and more a practical survival strategy. It's not about love letters or whispered sweet nothings under candlelight. It's about alliances, land access, even if you don't own any, and who's available in the village and willing. Your feelings are almost entirely beside the point. You step outside, trying to adjust your scratchy wool tunic, the same one you've worn to every church day and feast, now brushed hastily to resemble formality. It smells faintly of sheep, sweat, and desperation. But that's perfectly acceptable peasant couture. Your future spouse? You've known them most of your life. You've traded chores, stolen apples, and maybe even argued over who gets the least wormy turnip. You're not in love, but at least you're not strangers. By medieval standards, that's practically a fairy tale. Marriage here is an event mostly dictated by necessity. Your family has worked out the details: dowry, a goat, shared labour, and who's responsible for feeding whom. You're not sure if the priest even knows your names? He's more focused on ensuring the church gets its cut. Yes, marriage means yet another tax. Because of course it does. The ceremony's brief, as expected. Standing in the churchyard, you repeat words in a language you half understand. Latin flows from the priest's mouth, while villagers watch with polite boredom. Someone sneezes halfway through. Someone else yawns. You glance at your new spouse, exchanging a resigned half-smile. Till death do us part hits differently when average life expectancy barely stretches past 40. Still, the day isn't without a few scraps of joy. After the blessing, there's a modest gathering. Neighbours bring what little they can, some bread, a jar of sour ale, and one miraculous meat pie. You can't even tell what animal it came from, and honestly, you don't care. It's meat. You take a bite with a reverence usually reserved for saints. Someone produces a lute and begins playing the same 4 notes on repeat. Children dance, chickens dart through the crowd, and for a brief moment, it actually feels festive. You laugh, genuinely, when a friend slaps your back and jokingly asks if you're ready to raise 10 kids before 30. You respond with something about building an empire of goats. It's absurd, of course. You can barely afford firewood, let alone an empire. But still, the moment lightens your mood. The sun dips lower, casting golden hues across the village. Your new spouse stands beside you quietly. There's no hand-holding, no slow dance, just 2 exhausted souls watching chickens eat dropped crumbs. The romance of survival. Later, in your hut, now shared, you realise what medieval marriage really means. Twice the chores, twice the hunger, twice the responsibility, but also, strangely, twice the strength. There's someone to share the load now, someone to curse the mud with, someone who also pretends to enjoy gruel. You discuss tomorrow's chores. Your spouse will help patch the roof while you tend the goats, and if time allows, maybe you'll both sneak away to forage for wild herbs. Romantic, you joke. They snort in agreement. Romance here wears muddy boots and carries a shovel. You lie beside each other, fully clothed, on straw that pokes in all the worst places. Your stomach grumbles again, and theirs responds in kind. You laugh softly. It's the most intimacy you'll get tonight, but somehow it's enough. There's comfort in shared misery. Historians still debate whether medieval peasant marriages were genuinely affectionate or simply utilitarian arrangements. The truth, lying somewhere between duty and companionship, doesn't quite fit modern categories. You might not pen love poems, but when your spouse pulls the blanket higher over your shoulders, without a word, that says more than any verse. As sleep pulls you under, you don't dream of castles or feasts. You dream of a dry roof, warm bread, and your new spouse laughing beside you in the sun. And honestly, that might just be enough. The rooster crows loudly at a very unreasonable hour. Again. You groan and blink groggily into the darkness, where only the faintest hint of morning filters through the hut's patched roof. Your new spouse stirs beside you, equally unimpressed by the enthusiastic poultry alarm. There's no snooze button for roosters, no weekend sleep-ins for medieval peasants. The day begins whether you're ready or not. You sit up slowly, brushing straw from your clothes and stretching sore limbs. Today, like every day, promises back-breaking work. But now, you're not doing it alone. That sounds comforting until you remember. Marriage doesn't reduce the chores, it multiplies them. Especially when kids enter the equation. And believe it or not, in this world, kids show up fast. If you're lucky, You've got a year or two before you're outnumbered. If not, well, good morning, parenthood. Children here are not precious bundles swaddled in Pinterest-worthy linens. They're mouths to feed. More importantly, they're labour. Eventual, yes, but vital. From the moment they can stand without face planting, they're drafted into duty. No toddler tantrums allowed. No toys, no cartoons. Just tiny hands helping dig potatoes, scare off crows, or spin wool with fingers that barely understand the concept of dexterity. You hear shouting outside. Your neighbour's little boy has apparently wandered off again chasing a chicken. No one panics. There are no helicopter parents here, only mud-streaked mothers yelling across fields, hoping their offspring haven't gotten trampled by oxen. Parenting in medieval France is a balance of hope, prayer, and blunt force exhaustion. As you step outside, the morning fog clings to the village. Your youngest sibling, barely 6, stands barefoot in the mud, holding a bucket half her size. She's been up for an hour already, fetching water from the stream. You ruffle her hair, noticing the bruises on her arms from falling yesterday while chopping kindling. She doesn't complain. Complaints don't help. Just like hunger, cold and splinters, they're background noise in the peasant soundtrack. Inside your hut, your spouse is mashing turnips for breakfast. If you're lucky, maybe with a sprinkle of barley flour for flavour. A toddler, someone else's, sits gnawing on a stick in the corner. No one knows exactly whose child it is, but it doesn't matter. Children are everyone's responsibility and no one's priority. You shovel down breakfast and get to work. Today, you're digging furrows while your spouse tends to the goats and the kids collect thatch for roof repairs. It's a full family operation, and by operation, we mean chaotic, mud-smeared desperation. The children complain just enough to remain conscious, but not enough to stop moving, because idleness earns a sharp word or a swift cuff to the back of the head. Historians still argue whether medieval parents were harsh by necessity or simply products of their harsh world. Either way, kindness here looks like a softer tone, a shared crust of bread, or letting a child sleep an extra hour before sending them out to herd geese. At midday, you catch a rare moment of stillness. One of the older boys is carving something from wood, a toy horse perhaps. It's crudely shaped, more block than beast, but the intent warms you. You watch him for a moment before a younger sibling topples into his lap, and the horse becomes a weapon in the ensuing scuffle. The moment ends in tears and scolding. You sigh, wondering if peace is just another luxury reserved for the nobility. You remember losing your first sibling to illness. She was 7, delicate and bright-eyed. A fever swept through the village like a thief in the night, stealing children with terrifying efficiency. No one could save her. The local wise woman prescribed crushed beetles and rosemary smoke, but none of it worked. She was gone in 2 days. Everyone here has a similar story. High child mortality is just expected. No one carves headstones. The ground accepts them quickly, silently, like it's always hungry for more. Back home, your youngest is crying. A bee sting, nothing serious, but enough to trigger exhaustion-fueled wailing. Your spouse lifts the child gently, blowing softly on the red welt. You watch, heart heavier than usual. Despite everything, despite the filth, the work, the hunger, there's tenderness in the way they cradle the child, a soft hum to soothe the pain. In that moment, you realise that love does exist here. It just wears different clothes. It's in shared chores, in scraped knees washed with muddy water, in a half-stolen bite of apple given to a child who hasn't eaten all day. You won't find romance poems or lullabies, but you'll find fierce, quiet care. Evening falls with little ceremony. You sit near the hearth, such as it is, a fire barely strong enough to warm your feet. The children are curled up on the floor, tangled in each other's limbs, snoring softly. You eat dinner in silence, chewing slowly, muscles sore and mind weary. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that. But tonight, the hut is quiet. The roof holds, the children sleep. And for a brief, flickering moment, You allow yourself the ridiculous, rebellious thought, maybe you're doing okay. The morning sun peeks lazily over the trees, casting weak light through the cracks in your hut. You wake to the usual symphony of peasant life. Snoring children, clucking chickens, someone's goat attempting to eat something it definitely shouldn't. Today is a rare occasion, a village gathering. For once, you're not heading to the fields or slapping mud onto your roof. Today promises entertainment? Well, sort of. You rise and stretch, joints groaning their familiar complaints. Your spouse is already up, brushing straw off their tunic and coaxing the children into something vaguely resembling tidiness. The village has organised a special day, a feast day in honour of a local saint. Not one you can name confidently, but does it matter? The important thing is that you don't have to dig furrows or haul manure for a few hours. You make your way to the village square, where people have gathered in clumps. There's excitement in the air, not joy exactly, but a muted kind of anticipation. Any excuse to break the cycle of work, hunger, sleep is seized eagerly. You find yourself smiling, just a little. Today, there might even be music. You notice the makeshift stage erected near the church, a few crates stacked and draped with rough cloth. That's your entertainment venue. A group of travelling performers has arrived, bringing with them the medieval version of Netflix religious mystery plays. They're not exactly comedies, unless your idea of comedy involves extended scenes of eternal damnation, but they are free, and you didn't have to weed a single row of turnips to enjoy it. The actors begin, projecting their voices with exaggerated flair. The story is familiar. Someone sins, then regrets it deeply, then probably gets eaten by a demon in a horrifyingly symbolic costume made from animal skins and soot. You squint at the villain's mask, which appears to be a sheep's skull with beetle shells glued on for eyes. You have to admit, it's got character. The crowd watches in rapt attention. Children gasp, older folks nod solemnly, and someone's goat breaks free and briefly joins the performance. No one blinks. Honestly, the goat might be the most compelling actor on stage. You chuckle under your breath, earning a raised eyebrow from your spouse. Blasphemous, they whisper, but there's a twinkle in their eye. Despite the heavy religious tone, the performance offers a rare chance to laugh, to marvel, even to forget. You realise how hungry people are, not just for bread, but for distraction. The daily grind leaves so little room for imagination, for wonder. And here, for one afternoon, you get a taste. After the play, there's food of a sort, communal bread mostly, and a bucket of what someone insists is festive ale. It tastes like someone dropped an onion in sour rainwater, but it's stronger than your usual fare. And after 2 gulps, your cheeks are warm, and you don't mind the taste anymore. A fiddler begins playing, though the instrument is barely holding together. Still, a rhythm is a rhythm, and soon a few brave villagers begin dancing. You don't remember the steps, if there were ever official ones, but you shuffle awkwardly with the others, laughing at yourself as you nearly trip over your own feet. Your children stare in a mix of awe and horror. Later, they'll mimic your moves in cruel detail. You'll pretend to be offended. A few wandering vendors have set up near the edge of the square. One sells trinkets carved from bone, mostly animals, but also one suspiciously accurate miniature of the village priest. Another offers fortune readings with stones, declaring confidently that your future holds abundant harvest and mild winters. You nod solemnly, knowing full well she told the same thing to your neighbour and their neighbour. Still, the hope is comforting, even if it's generic. As dusk approaches, the celebration begins to fade. Families gather their children, now sticky from honey scraps and dizzy from running in circles. You're tired, but not the usual bone-deep exhaustion. This is the kind of tired that comes from movement, laughter, and being around other people who, just for a few hours, weren't thinking about hunger or taxes or leaks in their roofs. You make your way home, the fading light turning everything gold. Your spouse hums a tune from the play, a surprisingly catchy refrain about resisting temptation and not stealing your neighbour's goat. You both laugh. Back in the hut, the kids collapse into straw piles, still giggling about the beetle-eyed demon. You sit down and stretch your legs, sore from dancing. The room smells of firewood and slightly singed bread, and for once it's not terrible. Historians still debate how often peasants experienced leisure, or whether events like these were true breaks, or just more elaborate obligations. Honestly, from your muddy point of view, you don't care. Today felt like a gift. Before sleep takes you, your spouse leans over and whispers, "Same time next year." You grin, eyes already closing. Only if the goat returns for an encore. You're not sure what wakes you at first, the faint light creeping through the walls, the sound of your spouse stirring, or the deep, sinking feeling in your gut. Not hunger this time, though that's always simmering quietly in the background. No, this is a different kind of dread. It's court day. Not for you, thankfully. At least you hope not. But the village has a dispute to settle, and that means the Lord's bailiff is coming. He'll preside over justice, medieval style, a performance more than a process, and one where peasants rarely come out ahead. You rise early and shuffle outside. The air is heavy, humid, the kind of sticky morning that suggests rain is coming, and that nothing good will follow it. Villagers gather quietly in the square, avoiding eye contact, murmuring about the incident. Apparently, a cow wandered into a neighbour's garden and trampled a few precious cabbage plants. The cow's owner swears it was tied up. The cabbage owner swears vengeance. Yes, it sounds petty, but when your entire winter depends on 6 cabbage heads, it's war. The bailiff arrives late, as usual. He's dressed like a man who has never stepped in mud before, though he does now, and he curses loudly about it. He's flanked by 2 men with cudgels, because nothing says justice like a club and a sneer. The village priest trails behind them, looking vaguely bored. The accused, Pierre, whose cow allegedly committed the cabbage crime, stands stiffly, trying not to sweat through his one decent tunic. His accuser, old Gaston, holds a ruined cabbage dramatically aloft, like it's Exhibit A in the most important case of the century. You find a place on a tree stump and settle in for the show. The bailiff begins by reviewing the charges, though most of it sounds like gibberish, peppered with Latin terms you can't follow. There's no formal defence, Pierre just mumbles his explanation while staring at the ground. Gaston, on the other hand, has come prepared. He dramatically describes the loss, even claiming the cow glared at him while chewing the final leaf. A few villagers chuckle, the bailiff does not. You try to keep a straight face, but the absurdity of it all is impossible to ignore. A cow trial in the year of our Lord. Still, you don't laugh too hard. Justice here has a very short fuse. Punishments for peasants are rarely proportional. Stealing a loaf of bread might get your hand chopped off. Speaking out of turn could land you in the stocks or worse. Historians still argue how uniformly these rules were enforced, but from your vantage point, it seems like randomness reigns, or more accurately, favouritism. The bailiff calls for testimony. A child is dragged forward. He was playing near the cabbage patch and might have seen the crime. He mumbles something about hearing a moo and seeing hoofprints. That's enough. The bailiff slams the hilt of his sword on the table. Why the sword is needed remains unclear, and declares Pierre guilty. The punishment? A fine of 2 chickens payable to both Gaston and the Lord. You resist the urge to scoff. Gaston gets a chicken for damages, and the Lord gets one because he's the Lord. That's how justice works here. The crown always gets its share. Pierre doesn't argue. He simply nods, defeated, and mutters that he'll bring the chickens tomorrow. You know he can't spare them. He'll go hungry for a week. But arguing might land him in the pillory, or worse, so he keeps quiet. That's how everyone survives. As the court disperses, you overhear someone joke that at least no one got dunked in the river this time. It's not a joke you laugh at. Last month, a woman accused of theft endured a water trial, tied to a chair and tossed into the river. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent and dead. It's not exactly comforting jurisprudence. You return to your hut, still uneasy. The law here isn't about truth or fairness. It's about power. And who gets to swing it like a cudgel? The bailiff has already moved on, probably enjoying wine and a warm hearth in the manor, while Pierre sharpens his knife to slaughter one of his last chickens. Inside, your spouse is comforting one of the children, who's shaken by the spectacle. Was Pierre bad? They ask. You pause, unsure how to answer. No, you say softly. He was just unlucky. Dinner that night is quiet. A stew of wild herbs and boiled barley. No meat, of course. You eat slowly, tired from the tension, from the realization that justice here is a game you can't win. As the fire dims, you recall an old story, told in whispers, that a nearby village once rose up against a cruel lord, burned the manor to the ground, but none of them survived. The next lord built higher walls, and the taxes doubled. Justice in your world isn't blind, it's just looking the other way. You lie down, arms behind your head, eyes tracing the rafters overhead. You wonder idly whether the cow trial will make it into local law. Probably not. No one here writes anything down, but you'll remember it. Not because it was absurd, but because it was ordinary. The clouds hang low today, heavy with threat. The wind feels different too, faster, more urgent. You can feel it in your bones, the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen. Something's coming. And by mid-morning, that something arrives. Riders. Not just messengers or tax collectors this time. These are soldiers, armed and armoured, stomping through the village square on massive, snorting war horses like they own the earth beneath them. You freeze in place, sick anticipation, settling in your gut like a stone. One of them speaks, loudly, formally, and without a shred of interest in your feelings. By decree of the Count, all able-bodied men are summoned to support the campaign to reclaim the southern frontier. You will leave by first light tomorrow. Gather what provisions you can. There it is. War. Again. You don't move. You don't breathe. Around you, others stand equally still, as if pretending to be invisible might somehow spare them. You glance at your spouse across the square. Their face says everything. Fear, anger, helplessness. It's not the first time. It won't be the last. The soldiers dismount, barking orders, inspecting huts, pointing at villagers like they're choosing livestock. You're not given a choice. No explanation, no context. Just war, some border dispute between lords, some claim to a piece of land that looks exactly like every other muddy patch you've ever seen. But of course it's never the lords who go fight, it's you, the peasant, the bottom of the barrel. You shuffle back to your hut with numb limbs. The children don't understand. They're asking questions, tugging your sleeves, noticing the strange tension in the air. You want to shield them, to reassure them. But how do you explain that you might not come back? You try to pack. What is there to bring? A small sack of dried barley, a dull knife, a torn blanket. You stare at the pile, knowing it's pathetic. There's no armour, no proper weapons. You're not a soldier, you're a farmer with a hoe and chronic back pain. Your spouse helps silently. Their movements slow, robotic. When they speak, it's barely a whisper. Don't be brave, they say. Be invisible. You nod. That night, the hut is filled with a quiet sadness. The children are restless. You tell them stories you barely remember. Tales of clever peasants, outwitting giants, of fields that grow bread by moonlight. They fall asleep eventually, curled against your side, their soft breathing anchoring you briefly to the present. Before dawn, you rise and walk to the square. Dozens of others stand there too, clutching sacks, bows, clubs, anything that might pass for a weapon. The Lord Steward addresses you all, spitting out names and vague instructions. March south, join with the main force near the river. You'll be under Sir Etienne. Sir Etienne, a name that means nothing to you, just another knight who'll use you as a human shield. The march begins. You look back at your hut, at the fading light inside where your family still sleeps. You commit the shape of it to memory, just in case. The road is long, muddy, and miserable. Within a few hours, your feet are blistered. By evening, you're soaked and shivering. Meals, such as they are, come from whatever you can forage. One man brings a live chicken, which you all pretend not to notice is getting smaller every day. When you reach the camp near the river, it's chaos. Smoke curls from dozens of fires. There are real soldiers here, noblemen with gleaming chainmail, polished swords, and war horses that probably eat better than you. You're shoved into a group of fellow peasants and handed a spear. It's taller than you and looks like it was carved from leftover fence posts. The next day, you're sent into a skirmish. You have no idea who the enemy is. Some neighbouring baron's peasants, probably just as confused and terrified as you. Arrows whiz overhead, mud flies. You swing wildly at shadows, trying to stay behind the nearest large person. You manage to survive, though you're not sure how. Maybe you ducked, maybe you were too unimportant to hit. Back at camp, you sit by a fire, silent, staring at your bleeding hands. Around you, others sob quietly or curse into the night. One boy, no older than 15, stares blankly at the fire, his eyes refusing to blink. You don't ask what he saw, you already know. You stay for weeks. The war is directionless, the strategy unclear. You build ramparts, dig trenches, watch real soldiers get drunk while you patch holes in tents. Occasionally, another skirmish breaks out. Occasionally, someone dies. No one writes their names down. Historians still argue whether peasant levies were effective fighting forces or just cannon fodder in chainmail's shadow. You know the answer. You're here to make noble casualties look small. Then one morning, without warning, the captain announces it's over. A treaty's been signed. Or maybe someone important got bored. You're dismissed without ceremony, no payment, no rations for the road. Just a nod and a get lost. So you do. The walk home takes days, you're thinner. Your ribs show through your tunic. Your shoes are rags. Your thoughts are a dull grey haze, but your feet keep moving. Eventually, through fields you recognise, past trees you once climbed as a child, your village appears on the horizon. You reach your hut at dusk. The door creaks open. Your spouse gasps softly. The children stare, unsure whether you're a ghost or a miracle. You drop your sack and fall to your knees. No one says anything for a long time. Eventually, your spouse kneels beside you and whispers, "You came back. You did, but not whole." You wake with a start, disoriented, limbs sore in places you didn't know could ache. The war is behind you now, physically at least, but your body disagrees. It remembers every muddy step, every bone-rattling shiver, every hour spent digging trenches for men who forgot your name as soon as they gave you an order. Your hut feels smaller than you remember. The roof sags slightly, and a new draft snakes in from somewhere near the floor. But it's home, and your family, still here. That alone sets you apart from more than a few of your fellow conscripts. But as the days pass, it becomes painfully clear that something has shifted. Not just in you, but in how you now see the land around you. You're back to your old routine. Fields, mud, tools too dull to bother sharpening. But there's a nagging truth that gnaws at you more than hunger. This land isn't yours. It never was. You break your back every day coaxing life from soil that legally belongs to someone else. Your lord's land, his fields, his forest, even the creek your children splash in technically belongs to him. Everything you touch is subject to his whims. And after all that, you're required to hand over a portion of your crops, labour, and sometimes even your livestock, just for the privilege of staying here. Historians call it feudalism, which is a fancy word for don't get too comfortable. You don't pay rent in coin, you pay it in suffering. And if the Lord decides one day that your patch of land is better suited for grazing his deer, too bad. Your permission isn't required, nor is your opinion. Today you're headed to the manor to deliver a portion of your already pitiful barley harvest. Your hands tremble slightly as you lift the sack onto your shoulder, not from weakness, but from the boiling frustration you've learned to keep carefully buried. You pass neighbours along the road, all of them carrying similar sacks. No one speaks. The silence is thicker than the fog. You reach the manor gates, where armed guards watch you like you might suddenly sprout noble blood and start demanding rights. You shuffle into the courtyard, eyes low, waiting your turn to hand over the fruits of your labour. When it's finally your time, the steward barely glances at you before waving dismissively toward a stack of sacks already piled high. You place your barley gently on the heap, half hoping he won't notice how light it is this year. He does. He scowls. "You've brought less than expected," he says sharply. You stammer something about drought, about the war, about the late frost that killed your seedlings. He raises a brow. You brace for punishment or a fine you can't pay. But this time, he simply snorts. "You peasants always have excuses. Be grateful you're still allowed to till his land." You bow and leave quickly, fists clenched tightly, heart pounding in your ears. Gratitude. That's what they expect. Not just compliance, but thanks for the opportunity to break your back for someone else's profit. On the walk home, you pass the Lord's gamekeeper and remember bitterly how even the animals in the nearby woods are protected. You once snared a rabbit during a brutal winter, just one, and shared it with your starving children. Someone told. You spent 2 days in the stocks, pelted with spoiled vegetables and sneers. The rabbit, meanwhile, ended up on the steward's table. There are stories whispered among the older villagers, tales of land once freely farmed, of forests where anyone could hunt, rivers where you could fish without permission. But those times are long gone if they ever existed at all. Now your reality is simple. You farm land you don't own, in exchange for the right to not be evicted or imprisoned. And even that's conditional. You return to your hut, slumping against the doorframe. Inside, your spouse is mending clothing, eyes tired but steady. The kids are playing with stones, inventing a game where one pretends to be the Lord, and the others have to beg for dirt. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. You sit quietly for a while, then mutter, "I think I could walk this land blindfolded." Your spouse nods. "And yet it still doesn't belong to you." The words hang in the air like smoke. True, heavy, and inescapable. That night, you lie awake, staring up at the rafters again. You start counting how many generations your family has lived here. Your father, his father, his father's father, all of them toiling on the same land, for the same line of lords, and yet not one of them ever owned so much as a fistful of it. Historians still debate whether some peasants eventually gained ownership rights or leases later in the Middle Ages, especially in wealthier regions. But here, in your tiny corner of France, ownership is a fantasy. A dangerous one, too. The mere suggestion that you deserve what you labour for could be taken as rebellion. But still, you wonder, what would it feel like to work a field and know the harvest was entirely yours? To plant an apple tree and not fear it being claimed? To sleep at night without worrying whether some noble whim would change your life forever? That dream, flickering and fragile, nestles in your chest. You know you'll never live it. But maybe, just maybe, your children will. Assuming they survive long enough. The wind bites a little harder this morning, cutting straight through your clothes like you're not even wearing any. And to be fair, you're barely dressed by modern standards. You pull your wool tunic tighter around your chest, trying to close the gaps where the stitching's unravelled. The garment is coarse, itchy, and smells permanently of smoke and mildew, but it's all you've got. Again, clothing in your world isn't fashion, it's function, and barely even that. You shuffle to the corner of your hut, where a bundle of garments lies in a heap. All the family's spare clothes, such as they are. A second tunic for the children, a pair of leggings that may once have been white, now greyish-brown and stiff from years of wear. A single pair of worn shoes, cobbled together from leather so thin it feels like wet bark. Your spouse is sewing again, trying to reattach a sleeve using a fishbone for a needle and unravelled hemp for thread. You watch as they prick their finger for the third time this week. Maybe next winter, they say through a sigh, we'll have something without holes. Sure, you reply, maybe we'll even have sleeves and socks. You both laugh, but softly, because the truth isn't actually funny. Your feet are already half numb from the cold floor, and the winter hasn't even really started yet. Your outfit today includes layers of wool, mostly hand-me-downs from dead relatives or bartered from other families who fared marginally better. The colours are dull, browns, greys, off yellows, because dye is expensive, and no peasant is wasting precious resources to look festive. Historians note that medieval peasants sometimes had colourful clothing, but only when they could afford it, and that's almost never. The linen undertunic you wear beneath the wool is threadbare, riddled with patches. It once belonged to your grandfather. At this point, you wonder how much of it is original fabric and how much is just a tapestry of repairs. Your belt is made from braided hemp and barely holds your tunic closed. One tug from an enthusiastic goat, and you're flashing half the village. Outside, you spot your eldest trying to stretch out a shirt that clearly no longer fits. It was once a smock made for a 5-year-old. Now at 10, their arms stick out like twigs on a broom. But clothes aren't replaced when they're outgrown. They're passed down and then down again until they vanish into disintegration. The worst part? There's no such thing as clean. Laundry is a rare ordeal. Water must be hauled from the stream, then heated over a smoky fire. You scrub garments on stones with ashes or fermented urine. Yes, really, because soap is a luxury and human waste is a known medieval bleaching agent. Historians still debate whether this actually disinfected clothing or just made them smell like you gave up. You're leaning toward the latter. You remember once seeing a travelling merchant with a cloak so thick and richly dyed you could swear it changed colour in the sunlight. You nearly walked into a ditch staring at it. You tried not to, but envy is difficult to repress when your own cloak is basically a potato sack with a hole in it. Today's chores involve hauling bundles of firewood back from the edge of the forest. You wrap a woolen shawl around your shoulders, stiff, scratchy, and suspiciously damp from last night's leak. It doesn't help much. Cold air finds every hole and threadbare patch sliding down your spine and wrapping around your legs like icy vines. By midday, the sun finally pokes through the clouds, warming your face just enough to make you aware of how frozen your hands are. Your fingers are red, chapped, and stiff. Gloves? Don't be ridiculous. Those are for lords, clergy, or miracles. You try not to think about the noblewoman who once rode through your village with fur-lined boots and velvet sleeves. It's the kind of memory that makes your bones ache harder. Back in the village, someone's celebrating a name day. You see a young woman in a dress that's clearly been preserved for special occasions. It's still simple. Plain wool, maybe a ribbon or two, but compared to your current state, she looks like royalty. You suddenly feel every fray on your sleeves, every patch that doesn't match, every stitch that's pulled loose, and the smell. Oh, the smell. Clothing here doesn't just look worn, it smells alive. Smoke, sweat, earth, animal, and mould all combine into a scent that could knock out a small pig, and it clings to you like a judgmental ghost. Washing doesn't help much. One soak in the river, and your clothes return stiff sour, and now full of whatever happened to be floating downstream. Once your spouse jokingly suggested hanging your tunic near rosemary plants to make it smell better. You tried it. Now it smells like sweat and confused rosemary. As the sun sets, you gather your children and head inside. You remove your outer layers and hang them near the fire, hoping they'll dry before morning. Steam rises off them in little clouds of damp wool and despair. Your spouse wraps a threadbare shawl around their shoulders and mutters, "I think this used to be a blanket." You nod. Now it's fashion. You settle onto your straw bedding, fully clothed, because removing layers would be madness in this cold. As you pull the wool over your shoulders and try to tuck it under your chin, a breeze sneaks through a crack in the wall and makes you flinch. You grit your teeth. Tomorrow you'll patch the wall. Again. Historians sometimes romanticize peasant life. Simple, rustic, honest labour. But if they had to wear what you wear day after day, soaked in freezing mud and animal stink, they'd probably rethink their position. Still, you dream tonight of clothes that fit, clothes that smell good, a pair of socks for each foot, and maybe, just maybe, a cloak that doesn't let the wind slap you. Every 5 seconds. It's a modest dream. But then again, so is survival. It's the middle of the night when the sound reaches you. Distant at first, like a whisper clawing its way into your dreams. then louder, persistent, a low, hacking cough. Not yours this time. You roll over groggily and see your youngest curled up on the floor, shaking slightly, pale as linen. Their breath comes fast and shallow, and you know immediately something's wrong. You reach for them, your hand cool against their feverish forehead. You've seen this before. Fever, sweats, coughing so deep it sounds like it's coming from their bones. It starts slowly, then burns through a child in days, maybe a week, if they're lucky. The hut is still, heavy with dread. Your spouse sits up beside you, eyes already filled with the kind of fear that doesn't need to be spoken. They gently wrap the child in a damp cloth and whisper words of comfort, their voice cracking with each syllable. But words don't stop what's coming. You sit in silence as the rest of the village begins to stir. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you can hear other coughs echoing faintly outside. Something's moving through the village. Again. You remember last winter, when illness took 3 children from the family, 2 huts over. No priest could stop it. No herb woman could cure it. And no one dared bury the dead too close to their homes. You still avoid walking by that patch of field. By midday, half the village is coughing. Some are still trying to work, hacking between strokes of the hoe, sweating through their tunics. Others, like you, stay close to home, trying to cool fevered skin and spoon broth into mouths that no longer want to swallow. The local healer visits. She's bent with age, her cloak covered in odd pouches, filled with roots, bones, and unidentifiable bundles wrapped in cloth. She places one hand gently on your child's chest, closes her eyes and murmurs something in a language you don't recognize. Then she opens a pouch and pulls out a dried frog, which she places beneath your child's pillow. For the evil vapours, she says. You nod silently. You want to believe her. You need to believe her, because there's nothing else to hold on to. She leaves a few suggestions behind. Grind willow bark for the fever, crush garlic and rub it on the soles of the feet. Hang a dead mole over the door. Your spouse follows every instruction with reverent urgency. If hope is a spell, they're casting it with every breath. Historians still argue whether medieval folk medicine was deeply rooted in spiritual belief, or just a desperate grasp at anything that seemed to help. Standing over your child, watching their lips turn dry and cracked, you think maybe it's both. Outside, the village bell rings. Not for mass, not for a feast, but once for every death. By evening it's rung 3 times. You try to cook, though your hands shake too much to hold the ladle steady. The barley gruel thickens and burns slightly at the bottom. You don't care. You carry the bowl over, blowing on the steam, and try to coax your child into a bite. They take half a spoonful, then cough it back up. Your spouse sits beside them all night. You take turns holding the small too-hot hand. You whisper old stories, sing lullabies out of tune, and brush sweat from their brow with a damp cloth that dries too quickly. In the dark, you remember another time, years ago, when a strange sickness swept through and took your older brother. He was strong, younger than you are now, and yet gone in less than a week. He died on a Tuesday. The priest said it was God's plan. You said nothing, even as you helped bury him. You still don't know what kind of plan that was. The next day, you hear the priest is performing final rites in the square. Several families are already mourning. The healer says it's likely a lung fever, maybe from the cold weather or the damp huts, or perhaps the anger of a restless saint. She gives conflicting explanations depending on who's asking. You mutter bitterly to yourself, maybe it's just poverty, maybe it's just a life where warmth is a gamble and hunger wears down the body until it can't fight anything off. But saying that out loud doesn't help. That night your child sleeps restlessly, but sleep is sleep, and you count it as a small blessing. The frog stays under the pillow. The garlic makes the whole hut smell like a cursed kitchen. You still rub the willow bark on their wrists and whisper prayers, just in case. Death is always nearby in your world. It doesn't wait for the old or spare the innocent. It walks beside you in the fields, hides in your well water, and rides in the coughs of your children. Some days, you forget it's there. The other days, like this, it pulls up a stool at your hearth and stares. You hear the bell again, twice this time. Your spouse tenses, your child stirs, and you keep whispering the same words over and over. Just stay with us, just a little longer. There are no doctors here, no hospitals, no real medicine, just prayers, poultices, and the stubborn love of parents who refuse to give up. Because here, in medieval France, death may be a constant, but so is the fight against it. The fever finally breaks on the third night. Your child stirs in the dark, slick with sweat, but this time their breathing is softer, less ragged. You and your spouse watch silently, not daring to exhale too loudly, as the colour slowly returns to their cheeks. You don't celebrate, not yet, but you allow yourself the tiniest flicker of hope. And in this world, even that feels like a miracle. Outside, the village still wears its grief plainly. Black cloths hang over doors. The bell no longer tolls, either out of respect or exhaustion. It's hard to tell, but today is meant to be different. Today is a festival day. You almost laugh when you remember. A festival? Now. But the priest insists it's important. The harvest is complete, the days are shortening, and the saints must be thanked. Or appeased, or both. It's hard to keep track when each holy day seems to involve different offerings and consequences. You step outside into the brisk air, adjusting your patched tunic and smoothing back your hair. The village is alive with cautious motion, people preparing food, stringing worn cloth banners between huts, setting up crude tables and benches in the square. Children are already chasing one another through the mud, shrieking with delight. It's the loudest joy you've heard in weeks. Your spouse tucks a still weak child into a bundle of wool near the hearth and gives you a look that says, "Go on, keep an eye on the others." You nod and step into the commotion, unsure if you're ready to feel human again. Festivals in your world are strange creatures. They promise celebration, but they also demand effort. Decorating, baking, sweeping, hauling. No one gets the day off, really. It's just different work. More colourful, maybe, but still exhausting. You help lay out bread, flat, chewy, made from the lowest grade flour you can barter. Someone's brought apples, small and bruised, but precious nonetheless. A jar of honey appears, and for a moment the crowd murmurs like a miracle has occurred. No one asks where it came from. You suspect it was hoarded, perhaps hidden from tithe collectors. Honestly, who can blame them? A fiddler tunes his instrument, a cracked, worn thing that squeals more than it sings, but everyone claps politely when he starts up. The priest begins a blessing in Latin and the crowd mostly nods along, eyes already drifting toward the food. When he finally finishes with a loud Amen, there's a shuffle and surge as people begin to eat, talk, and remarkably, laugh. You find yourself sitting beside a neighbour you haven't seen smile in weeks. They offer you a slice of onion pie, and you accept it like it's gold. It's sharp, warm, and crusty, and it makes your eyes water from more than just the onions. Nearby, children have started a game of Stick the Pig, which involves a stick, a muddy sack, and wildly unclear rules. It looks mildly dangerous and deeply entertaining. Someone's cousin has carved a puppet from scrapwood and performs a short, wobbly play about St. George and the dragon. The dragon, portrayed by a boy in a mouldy cloak with goat horns, spends most of the performance making fart noises. The children scream with laughter. The priest sighs, but even he cracks a smile. You glance around and see something strange. Community. It's easy to forget how tightly everyone clings to one another until days like this. Shared bread, shared grief, shared moments that push back against the darkness, just enough. Still, not everything is light. You overhear an argument near the edge of the square. Someone's complaining that the steward took the best cuts of meat from the tithes again. Another says the ale has been watered down, again. And someone else mutters that the Lord should be the one serving you for once, not hiding in his manner while you sing his praises. It's risky talk, but common during festivals, when people are tipsy and bold. Historians still debate whether festivals offered true freedom of expression for peasants, or if they were more of a pressure valve, ritualized moments of sanctioned chaos before everything returned to the usual misery. But standing here, wiping honey from your fingers, you think, maybe they're both. Later in the evening, the fire is lit. A great bonfire built from fallen branches, old fence posts, and one suspiciously familiar cartwheel. Flames crackle high into the night, casting long shadows and warming the crowd. People dance poorly and joyfully. Even your spouse appears for a while, holding the recovering child close, swaying slowly to the beat. For one shimmering hour, you forget the hunger, the sickness, the cold, the taxes, the fear. You remember what it's like to be human. A friend slaps your back and thrusts a wooden cup into your hand. It's some kind of festival brew, fermented barley maybe, or turnip, or both. You drink it anyway. It burns going down and leaves your throat dry, but it makes you laugh, and that's worth the scratchy tongue. Eventually, the fire dies down, the music fades, and families begin drifting home. You help carry the weak child, now bundled tight and half asleep, back into your hut. The air inside smells of smoke, wool, and worn-out joy. As you settle into bed, you realise your body is sore not from labour, but from dancing, eating, and maybe a little too much brew. You chuckle quietly, and your spouse raises an eyebrow. "You're in a good mood," they whisper. "Give it a day," you reply. "I'm sure misery will catch up." You both laugh, genuinely, and snuggle closer under the patched blanket. Outside, the night is colder now, but the warmth in your hut lingers, because sometimes survival is a celebration in itself. And in a life full of suffering, that's worth raising a wooden cup to. The festival glow doesn't last long. By the next morning, the square is empty, scattered with muddy footprints, broken mugs, and a chicken that definitely doesn't belong to anyone, at least not anymore. You're back to your normal rhythm. Sore joints, cold porridge, and a sky that looks like it's about to cry on you again. But something's different. There's a tension in the air, subtle but sharp, like the village is holding its breath. Word spreads fast, even without parchment or printing presses. Someone from the next town over, 2 valleys away, stood up to their lord, refused to pay the grain tax, said the harvest was theirs, and they'd keep it, just like that. At first you laugh it off. Brave, yes. Stupid, definitely. No one gets away with that. But then a few others start to murmur similar thoughts. What if we just didn't pay? What if we kept what we grew? You scoff, that's a quick way to get your hut burned down. Still, the idea sticks in your head like a stubborn burr. Over the next week, the murmuring gets louder. The bailiff comes through on horseback, his usual sneer looking a bit forced. He notices the way people don't bow as low, don't rush to the roadside. He scowls but says nothing. Then one night, a gathering happens. Not at the church, not in the square, but in a barn at the edge of the village. You're invited. You don't know what to expect, but you go anyway. Inside are about 24 people, neighbours, friends, even the thatcher, who rarely speaks to anyone. Everyone's got the same wary look in their eyes. Someone stands and clears their throat. "We've had enough," they say. "We break our backs, and for what? We starve while the steward rides through in a fur cloak." It's not a speech, it's a spark. People begin speaking up. Slowly at first, then faster. Stories spill out. Of taxes collected early, of beatings for late payments, of livestock seized, of grain taken right from children's mouths, of years lost to endless toil, with no end in sight. You feel something unfamiliar swelling in your chest. Is it anger? Pride? Hope? Then someone says it. "We should do what they did in Saint Laurent." You freeze. Everyone knows about Saint Laurent. It's become a whispered legend. Peasants rising up, storming the manor, driving out the lord's men, keeping their grain. For a few short weeks they were free. And then, of course, the soldiers came. The village burned. The leaders disappeared. No one speaks of them aloud anymore, but tonight someone does, and no one silences them. Historians debate the causes and frequency of peasant revolts. Some see them as rare bursts of desperation, others as inevitable pressure releases in a society stretched too thin. But standing there in that barn, hearing the fear, fury, and fire in your neighbours' voices, you realise something important. Revolt isn't a decision. It's a reaction, a boiling point. The plan, if it can even be called that, takes shape over the following days. A small group will confront the steward next time he comes to collect. They'll demand lower taxes, fairer treatment, a portion of the forest to gather firewood legally. It's not rebellion, not yet. Just a plea, a warning. You're not sure you believe it will work. The day arrives. You gather in the square, hearts thudding, hands clenched. The steward appears on schedule, flanked by 2 guards. He starts his usual collection routine, barely looking at the people handing over their hard-earned goods. Then the thatcher steps forward. He speaks plainly, voice calm but firm. We've come to ask for fairness. We've given too much for too long. The steward doesn't even blink. He waits, then laughs. You peasants are adorable, he says, and then he orders the guards to grab him. Everything explodes. Someone throws a rock. A guard swings his sword, catching another man across the shoulder. Screams erupt. People scatter. Some fight, some flee. You stand frozen for a heartbeat, then tackle one of the guards. Years of hay lifting finally coming in handy. It's chaos. In minutes, it's over. One guard flees on horseback. The steward is unconscious. The thatcher's bleeding. A woman is wailing over her brother's body. You look down at your hands. They're shaking. You've crossed a line. There's no going back now. The village scrambles. Plans are made. Some want to hide in the forest. Others want to send word to nearby villages. A few whisper that the priest should deliver a letter to the Lord, explaining this was all a misunderstanding. You know better. Within days the retribution comes. A company of soldiers, well armed, well fed, and not in the mood for negotiation. You and the others scatter. Some run, some hide, some fight, some die. You make it out, barely, through the woods, breath ragged, hands blistered, guilt gnawing at your insides. You hear screams behind you. Smoke. Your village is burning. You stay hidden for 3 days before daring to return. The square is blackened. The barn is gone. The steward's house stands untouched. A warning. The surviving villagers are silent, haunted. You find your spouse and children still alive. Your hut, miraculously, still standing. The child's frog talisman is still under the pillow. Maybe miracles exist after all. That night, you sit by the hearth, turning a piece of bread slowly in your hands. You think of Saint Laurent, of the thatcher, of the brief, sharp taste of defiance, and of the cost. You didn't win, but for one moment you felt free. And maybe, in a life like yours, that's something worth remembering. You've aged 10 years in the past 10 days. Or at least, that's how it feels. Your body, already worn from decades of labour, now carries the weight of recent trauma. The failed revolt hangs in the air like smoke, settling into every breath, every conversation that stops too quickly when someone passes by. You're not imprisoned, you're not dead, but you've been marked. Everyone knows it, especially the Lord. No formal punishment was delivered yet. Perhaps they thought the flames were punishment enough, or maybe they're saving something worse for later. Either way, you're back to your routine. Sort of, but it doesn't feel like a return. It feels like walking across thin ice, each step a silent plea for forgiveness. You wake up stiff, your joints swollen and your fingers trembling as they fumble with the string that ties your cloak. Your spouse doesn't ask how you slept anymore. Both of you know the answer. Sleep comes in thin layers now, interrupted by pain in your knees or dreams of fire and shouting. Sometimes, just rolling over makes you grunt like a wounded ox. You shuffle out to the fields, accompanied by your eldest, now strong enough to carry a full bucket of water and still chase a chicken halfway across the village. You try to smile at them, but the effort pulls something in your cheek. Old age has come for you early. You're not even 40. In medieval France, age isn't measured by numbers. It's measured by how much you can still carry, how fast you can still walk, whether you can still work from sunup to sundown without collapsing. You know plenty of people older than you who are already considered done, not dead, just left behind. You pass one of them on the way to the fields. Old Marie, hunched almost double, wraps herbs for her aching knees. She hasn't worked in years, not because she doesn't want to, but because her body simply refuses. She once delivered half the village's babies, but now she's forgotten by most. Even her grown children moved to another village when the grain yield dropped. You pause and speak with her for a moment. Her voice is a whisper of what it used to be. She chuckles softly when you complain about your back. Just wait, she says. One day you'll miss having pain in both legs, means they're still yours. You keep walking, that thought clinging to your mind like mud to your boots. Back in the fields, the work feels harder than usual. You take more breaks now. You don't want to, but if you don't, your chest tightens, your arms ache, and your knees wobble like wet reeds. You lean on your hoe and pretend you're just inspecting the soil. No one buys it, but they're kind enough not to say anything. The younger ones glance at you sideways, not cruelly, but with a quiet understanding. Your prime is over. You're transitioning from workhorse to cautionary tale. One of them offers to take your place, digging the irrigation trench. You hesitate, then nod slowly. It hurts more than the trench ever did. At lunch, you sit by the stream, chewing slowly through hard bread that tastes like regret. Your teeth aren't what they used to be. You turn to mush anything that doesn't already resemble it. A neighbour sits beside you and starts talking about the upcoming winter, how much firewood is left, whether the grain will hold, if anyone's seen the rat problem creeping toward the food stores. You nod along, occasionally offering a grunt of agreement. But part of you drifts off staring at the clouds, remembering how you used to race the other boys up the hill near the old oak tree, back when your legs were like springs instead of cracked branches. Historians often note that aging in the Middle Ages was accelerated not by time, but by toil. They're not wrong. Your body has been in a permanent state of overuse since you were 12. There's no retirement plan here, no golden years, only rust. When you return home that evening, the children are finishing chores, your spouse is mending a tunic, and the fire is already burning low. You lie on your back and stretch, wincing at the familiar pop of your spine. One of the kids walks over and kneels beside you with a scrap of cloth soaked in something herbal. Marie gave me this for your knees, they say. You raise an eyebrow. Trying to replace me already? They grin. You've been grumpier since the revolt. You both laugh, and for a second, the lines on your face seem less deep. Later, as the children sleep and the hut falls quiet, you sit with your spouse near the hearth. You stare into the flames, thinking about how many years you have left. Not in life necessarily, but in usefulness, in dignity. There will come a day, and not long from now, when your children become your caregivers. When your hands can't hold tools. When you're too slow to keep up, too weak to help. And what then? Old peasants become mouths to feed with nothing to offer. There are no nursing homes, no pensions, just faded relevance. You whisper the question to your spouse, what happens when I'm too broken to work? They're quiet for a while. Then with a small steady voice they reply, then we feed you anyway. You fed us. You nod. But deep down, you know how hard it is. You've seen what happens. The old don't die dramatically. They simply vanish from the conversation. They get left behind on the way to the fields. They stop being asked for advice. They're no longer seen. You vow, silently, to keep working as long as your hands allow. To keep swinging that hoe, even if it means gritting your teeth through every breath. Because in your world, usefulness is survival. Still, as the fire crackles and the night wraps around the village like a thick, familiar blanket, you feel your body begging for rest, not sleep, rest. And even though you know rest is dangerous because it makes you soft and soft doesn't last here, you close your eyes and let the silence hold you for just a moment. You are still here, still working, still needed, but not forever. You wake before dawn, not because you're needed. No one expects much from you anymore, but because your body refuses to let you sleep past the roosters. Old habits die hard, or maybe they just outlast everything else. You sit on the edge of your straw bedding, rubbing your knees, trying to convince them to cooperate. They don't. The stiffness is familiar now, almost companionable. Outside, the morning fog creeps low across the fields, swallowing fences and footprints alike. The cold slips under the door like a thief. You hear your children rustling in their corners. They're older now, nearly grown. You don't know when that happened. One is gathering firewood without being asked. Another is already warming a thin broth over the fire. You feel pride swell in your chest, tangled with guilt that you can't help more. You remember when you were their age. You didn't think about anything but surviving the next day. Not about legacy, not about meaning, and certainly not about what happens when the fire inside you starts to dim. But lately, you think about it all the time. The priest said something strange yesterday. He was speaking during the Sunday sermon, rattling off the usual promises of eternal reward, when he paused and said, "This life is a test, a short one for some, but a test all the same." A test. You've been tested every day of your life, in hunger, in pain, in frostbitten toes and lost crops and the deaths of friends before they reach 20. You've been tested by lords who taxed you dry, by soldiers who marched you off to wars you didn't understand, and by sickness that took people you loved and left you behind. And yet somehow you're still here. Barely. You step outside into the morning light. It's a rare, clear day, and the sky's streaked with pinks and golds that don't belong in your world. They belong in paintings or songs, but for a moment you just stand there, letting it wash over you. Your neighbour waves from across the field. He's hunched now, slower than he used to be, but still working. Like you. Like all of you. There's no retirement, no peaceful cottage by the sea. You'll work until you drop, and when you do, someone will bury you quietly, say a few rushed prayers, and move on. Historians still argue about how much faith truly mattered to peasants like you. Were you pious because you believed? Or because belief was the only thing you could afford to hope for? You're not sure. But today you cling to the idea that there's something beyond this. Because otherwise, what was it all for? You shuffle to the field, ignoring the stiffness in your spine. One of your children joins you, helping you balance a hoe across your shoulder. You joke that you're just supervising now. Quality control for medieval dirt. They laugh, a real laugh. You remember the day they were born. How small they were. How scared you felt. You were sure you'd drop them. Sure the world would swallow them whole. And yet, here they are, taller than you now, stronger, kinder. You tilt your face toward the sky again, wondering if the saints ever see this, if they look down through stained glass windows and see peasants who tried, who endured. At midday, your family eats together. It's not much, some barley stew, a bit of turnip, but everyone's quiet, content. Your spouse nudges your elbow and points to the youngest, now chasing chickens with surprising speed. That one, they whisper, might live long enough to see something different. You nod but say nothing, because deep down you're not sure. You want to believe things will change, that someday peasants will own their land, eat enough, sleep without fear, wear clothing that doesn't scratch their skin raw. But in your world, hope feels dangerous, like tempting fate. As evening falls, the sky darkens slowly, almost gently. You sit near the fire, warming your hands, letting your bones relax. The hut smells like wood smoke, wool, and stew. Familiar things, the sounds of your family moving around you, whispering, laughing, cleaning, make your chest ache. Because it's beautiful, and because it might not last. In the candlelight, your spouse touches your hand and says, "You've done more than most. You've kept us alive." You smile faintly. That's the job, isn't it? But inside, you wonder if it was ever supposed to be this hard. You lie down for the night, pulling the blanket up to your chin. The children are asleep. The wind has calmed. The fire is low but still glowing. You close your eyes. And for the first time in a long while, you allow yourself to dream of something better. Not because it's likely, but because it's necessary. Because without the dream, without that fragile whisper of maybe someday, what's left? Just cold, just mud, just silence. But with the dream, there's light, however faint, and in that flicker, you finally rest. The fire crackles low now, casting long soft shadows on the walls of your humble hut. Outside, the wind has quieted, and the village lies still beneath a canopy of stars, each one a silent witness to the centuries of struggle, endurance, and unspoken courage stitched into lives like yours. You shift slightly beneath your worn woolen blanket, your limbs tired but no longer tense. The ache in your bones feels dull, distant. You've lived through hardship, through hunger, through loss, and yet, through it all, something quietly burned inside you. Not hope, always, but will. The will to survive, to protect, to endure. The rhythm of your breath slows. The children breathe gently beside you. Your spouse hums an old lullaby under their breath. Something half remembered from childhood, soft and soothing, like the brush of wind through tall grass. Even the chickens seem to have settled. Outside, the moon casts silver across the fields. You've walked your whole life, fields you never owned but always tended. The earth remembers your footsteps, even if no scroll or book ever will. And as your thoughts fade into the hush of night, you let go of the weight, the work, the worry. Just for now. Tomorrow may come with more struggle. It usually does. But tonight, you are still here. And in this stillness, in this soft dark, there is peace. Just listen to the quiet. Feel the warmth of the fire. Let it all drift away. Sleep now, gentle soul. Your journey through misery has ended. Sweet dreams.